Good. All right. So welcome, everyone. If this is your first time attending one of these virtual meetups, then great to have you here. It's been a while since we all met in person. I'm holding on hope that we might do it again at some point this year, but right now, no specific plans, unfortunately. So we'll continue to meet virtually. Every couple of weeks is the goal. We met a couple of weeks ago. We talked about technology and tools, particularly around the support team stack. That was a good discussion. I do have a partial recording of that, which I just realized I have not yet uploaded. I'm going to post that to the community in case you're interested in going back and watching it. This week, we're going to talk about landing your first customer success job. And I picked this topic, number one, because I know there's always, people looking to break into customer success for the first time. I also know it can be a very frustrating process because, typically if you're applying for this kind of job for the first time, there's not a lot of resources out there to help. And so I wanted to kind of try to help with that process a little bit myself. But also I hope we can have a, kind of a dialogue around it, because there'll be some people on the call today that have already had, got their first job, or maybe people that have hired others into customer success roles. So my hope is that, we can all kind of share experiences, and I've got a few kind of questions or topics, kind of themes, just to kind of kick us off. But then I really want it to be, a discussion. I think we'll get some of the most value rather than me just sitting here and presenting at you for an hour. So that's the plan. But before we get into the actual content itself, I want to just start by thanking all our sponsors. As I mentioned last time, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. This is something that's new for this year, but we're fortunate that we've got some great relationships within the customer success community globally, and they recognize that Atlanta's kind of an up-and-coming tech center, and they want to be supportive of the community here. So big thank you to Success Coaching, User IQ, MetaCX, and Customer Success Box, who are our community champion sponsors. And then you can see there's a number of other partners as well that provide us support in different ways, both promotion and financial support as well. So really, really grateful for all of our sponsors. As a reminder, we don't just meet every 2 weeks. We also have an online community, a Slack community, which everyone's based in Atlanta. Anyone who's based in Atlanta is welcome to join. We're trying to keep that piece of it localized to Atlanta. If you're not yet a member, there's a link there on the screen. Please just go to that bit.ly link, fill in a very super quick 3 or 4 question form, and we'll review your application and get you in there as quickly as we can. We share kind of job announcements, resources. It's just a place to kind of ask questions and continue the conversation with your local customer success peers in between these virtual meetups. And also a reminder that we don't do a lot on social. There's only a limit to how much we can do, but we do have a LinkedIn page and a Facebook page, both of which we try to keep updated with events and things that we're doing. So you're not going to get flooded with notifications, but it is a good way to kind of stay plugged in. So if you aren't following us, please consider doing so. And we also be grateful if you would kind of share any announcements that we post, just to help us kind of get the word out to more people within the local community. And then lastly, those of you who've been kind of part of this community for a while will know that we do regular monthly email digests that we send out to all subscribers. And this is kind of like a convenient summary of everything that's kind of happened in the last month and everything that's coming up in the next month. So we have some job roles in there, we have some events, we recognize people that have been promoted or started new jobs. So it's just it's kind of a fun read once a month. And we're always interested in content for that. So if you are hiring, or you have been promoted, or you have got a new job, please share it. And we'd love to include you and recognize that. To subscribe, just text ATLCS to this short code 33777, and we'll add you to the list. So with that said, let's move on to today's topic, which is landing your first CS job. When I was kind of thinking this through, I was thinking of it kind of in 3 stages. And this is based on, my own experience applying for jobs, as well as, I've hired a lot of people over the years, and I've also helped a lot of people in their job searches. And I think kind of the first piece is working out what type of customer success job you're looking for and how to kind of interpret the job description and work out whether it's that right type for you, because there are lots of flavors of CSM out there in the market. And if you're trying to apply for a job that isn't right for you, then you're probably going to be unsuccessful either in the application or, worse still, get the job and then find out you're unsuccessful. So I wanted to talk a little bit about identifying and kind of what some of the things are to look for as you try and work that out for yourself. So that was kind of the first stage. The second stage was around resume and how to tailor that. Maybe you've got an existing resume, how to kind of update it and tailor it and make it more customer success specific. There's some very simple things that you can do that can really make a big difference. And I kind of lump in with resume also LinkedIn profile, because obviously nowadays everybody's visiting your LinkedIn profile as well. In fact, they probably put a little bit more weight on that than your resume, because it's kind of more, there's more kind of social accountability there. Shall I put it like that? You can't embellish quite the same way as you might on a resume. So I certainly know I kind of cross-reference the two, and I learn different things from each. So I wanted to talk about resume and LinkedIn. And then the final part is kind of like I guess applying and the interview piece. I think the interview stage, looks similar to a lot of job roles until you get to the point where typically there's some sort of exercise or project that or a presentation they're required to do. So I thought we might just talk a little bit about what experiences people have had, for those of you who've been through the process, what are the kind of typical tasks or projects or presentations that you've been asked to do as part of an interview process. And I, also talk about some resources, like places you can go to find information to help you prepare for those meetings. So with that said, I'm not going to go through introductions today because we have like 18, 19 people on the call. But, I would love to, as I said, make this interactive. So let's start off with kind of identifying the right customer success roles. Actually, before we do that, why don't, if you look on your GoToMeeting, showing Zoom nowadays, not GoToMeeting. If you look on your Zoom panel, do you see some way to kind of raise your hand? I'm not sure if that's visible or not. I would love to, yeah, there we go. Clark's found it. He's got a thumbs up. So put your thumbs up or raise your hand, wave, whatever you want to do if you're on camera, if you are currently looking for your first customer success role. Okay, cool. So there's about 7, 8 people looking for the first role. And what about looking for just your next customer success role? So maybe you've been in customer success, but you're not currently employed. Or maybe you are employed and you're looking. Okay, just a couple. Got it. And then who here has, hired people for customer success roles and can lend a little bit of guidance to the rest of the group? All right. Good. Okay, good. That means I'm not doing this all myself. I like it. Right then, so let's talk about the different types of job role of customer success. So I'll start off with very kind of high level thoughts, and then I'd love to open it up. So when I think about customer success, if someone says they do customer success, there are some questions that I would ask pretty quickly to understand what they mean by that. Like, what is the type of customer success they do? So The first one is around kind of the engagement model, the level of touch, as it's often referred to in the industry. So is this a high touch customer success role or a low touch or tech touch? That's typically the terminology you'll hear. You may not see that in a job description, but you can kind of look for clues. So a high touch customer success role is where typically you have a small number of high value customers that you're responsible for their success. So that is a little more akin to what may have, what a kind of a traditional account manager type role might have looked like, where you're building really deep relationships. You maybe got multiple people within the company that you're building relationships with, so multiple stakeholders. So you're having to learn the dynamics of the company and who reports to who, and it's a very kind of relationship-led type model. And you're kind of basically acting as a very kind of personal coach as you guide them through a journey that involves using your product or your service to achieve business outcomes. So that's kind of at one end of the scale. And that's great for people that, really like spending their time one-to-one with individuals, whether it's on the phone or on Zoom or in person, maybe at some point in the future. That's a very relationship heavy role. Then there's typically something I'd say in the middle, which is where you have less contact with customers, but you are still getting one-to-one on occasion with some customers. But overall, you maybe have a bigger portfolio that you're looking after, maybe 100, maybe 200 accounts. You can't go out to lunch with them all, right? You can't know them all to that level of detail, but there's some in there that you do. And then the rest of them, you're doing more one-to-many communications. You're doing kind of group emails. You're doing maybe webinars and sharing out kind of resources with them in a more low-touch way, and only getting high touch when there's a problem, or maybe once a year when you're doing some planning, something like that. So it's kind of more of a hybrid model. There, you also need to have good relationship building skills, but you're typically dealing with smaller companies, and so you don't necessarily need to know kind of how big enterprise works. You might be operating more with kind of mid-size or smaller companies. So it's typically you're working with founders or, CEO founders or people that are, a little more involved in the nitty gritty of the day to day. So they're not so abstracted as you might find in a larger enterprise. And then at the other end of the scale, there is what I call pure tech touch, which is where literally the business model means that you very rarely speak to a person in customer success. So that's kind of where my company is, Shootproof. We have tens of thousands of customers, each paying us between $0 and $60 a month. So if I speak to anybody, I've probably lost money that month if I speak one-to-one. So I'm trying to work out how to use data and analytics to understand the behavior and the needs of my customers, and then deliver help to them, proactive advice, guidance in a very automated way. And that requires less of the one-to-one personal skills, although you need to, still helps because you're still crafting emails and communications, right? So you still need to think about, have some of those skills, but you're a little more focused on kind of the technology and data and setting up, using tools to do things kind of in bulk, which is a kind of a slightly different skill set. So those are the kind of three broad categories. Now, it's not quite as clean as that, obviously. Like you might have a company like ours, or like Slack, for example, where 90% of your customers are tech touch, but you still have a small segment that pay you more, and you have a high touch model with those. So you can have a mixture of these models even within the same CS organization. But typically, in terms of your specific role, you'll be in one or the other. So if you're applying to Slack, don't assume, oh yeah, it's tech touch, I'm doing data and analytics and automation, because you may be applying to the team within Slack that deals with their top customers, and it's a very high touch model, right? So I'm going to pause there and just kind of let others weigh in, maybe questions or other commentary from folks that have, you know, hired people into these different types of roles. I see Bradford's got a hand up. I don't know if that's intentional, but if it is, Bradford, do you want to go first?
Sorry, that was unintentional.
It was unintentional. Okay.
Sorry.
I've got a question, James.
Yeah, go for it.
For people that are starting out in the space, is there an end of that spectrum that tends to be the lower barrier to entry, or do you see people that are beginning starting one end versus the other? What's kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, my personal perspective is you come in the middle. So you come in with, because typically people coming into customer success are coming from other customer facing roles. So you've got the relationship building skills, right? You've got that ability to build rapport, to kind of, you know, ask good questions, learn about people. So you'll come into maybe a company where you have 200 accounts and you're working your way through those and you're having some one-to-one contact using those skills. But if you screw things up, worst case is you're going to lose an account that's, you know, still relatively small. What they're not going to do is necessarily put somebody who's not necessarily, or they're going to think, people will think harder about putting somebody with zero experience on an account that pays them $1 million a year, right? Because there's a lot of risk to the company that way. So typically an entry level role, kind of where you learn all the core skills and find out kind of where the sweet spot is for you, would be dealing with that mid-market customer range. That's my perspective. Anybody want to kind of agree or counter that?
Yeah, this is James Tober. I think I mentioned this in a couple sessions ago, but another way to kind of split this, and I think from an entry level perspective, you're right, that for your first customer success role, you're not going to be working with the customers that represent the highest value to that employer. Mm-hmm. But I do think another way to kind of split how customer success, how different companies are hiring for customer success or even understand customer success. From my point of view, there's three ways that companies come to or end up creating customer success organizations. They either start from a customer support concept and then say that they want to move up from there from a value perspective. They start from a sales and subscription renewals perspective, and then say they want to get and they either still acknowledge that that's very transactional, and your customer success role is really just a glorified, internal sales role, which is fine. It's a renewals expert, or you're coming at it from a professional services perspective, where a customer's been spending a lot of high touch time sending consultants either on-site or virtual working with customers, and they want to split the project deployment aspect of a customer from the ongoing success of a customer. So that's kind of the way I've seen those three different roles, and they tend to, and those three tend to also lend themselves to, a certain amount of differentiation when we talk about volumes. You're not going to have that high touch professional services with tens of thousands of customers. So that's probably going to be an organization which is coming at it more from a renewals perspective, or from a customer support perspective in terms of where they've grown into customer success. I think there's very few organizations which have created customer success from the pure theoretical aspects, academic definitions of it. They've all kind of stumbled into it from one of those three other areas. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So thanks, James. I agree with what you said. I think there's another element, and that is the as a service element, right? As we're selling software as a service or infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, I'm seeing that customer success managers are attached to that, right? To monitor consumption and to ensure adoption of the product. So I agree in terms of historically, where do people develop from? They either develop from the sales track, from the customer support delivery track or from the professional services track. Agree with you 100%, James. I think now, though, with software as a service and as our services are being sold with OpEx versus CapEx, I'm seeing customer success managers attached to those to help with the subscription services as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in its purest sense, right? If you ask somebody like myself, who's kind of a customer success evangelist, what customer success is, it's about helping customers extract the maximum value from the products they've already purchased. And if you do that, then, you know, the belief is that the customers will stay with you for longer, they'll spend more money with you over time, and they'll tell their friends and family, right? Which reduces the cost of acquisition. That's the, as James said, the purest view, right? And then in reality, it's usually, oh crap, our churn is super high. We need a customer success team, or, you know, we need somebody to work on renewals. Like, let's call it customer success. So what you'll find is there's lots of roles. You know, one of the things that you might find is there are roles that are just rebadged customer success that actually are not really what I'd say is true customer success, which is proactive kind of value creation. It's more like I'll be quite honest, when I first set up my first customer success team back in the UK, I screwed it up. My team became like 15th level support. It was like the place that all the crap in the company flowed to. Like, if no one else could solve it, it would end up at customer success. And it became known as the place that customers went to die, which you know, I can say with a laugh now, but, you know, I had to blow up that whole team and start again, because it isn't, if it's just implemented to prevent churn, you end up in a very reactive mode, just focusing on all the unhappiest customers who are shouting the loudest, and you never get onto your front foot and start working with the happy ones. Well, not the happy ones, the ones that really, you know, need your help and are willing to listen. So, you know, I think the sales component is kind of the second. If we talk about the high touch, low touch as being the first, I think the level of sales and the commercial kind of aspect of your role is another dimension, which is, you know, are you going to be responsible for negotiating renewals or closing upsell deals? And in some organizations, customer success has that. In other organizations, it doesn't. There's no right or wrong. It is possible to do both. It is hard to do both, because if you're going to become a trusted advisor with a customer, which is ultimately the way you get them to listen and follow your advice, you have to be trusted. But it's sometimes hard to do that when you have this kind of sales target floating around behind you that the customer always thinks, well, is James telling me that because it's best for me, or is he trying to close a deal? But it can be done. But you'll find that some companies, they have one role that has both existing customer kind of retention as well as closing commercial new business or renewals. And in other companies, they separate out those two, like church and state. They're like, you just focus on value creation, and then you just focus on commercial negotiations and selling new stuff.
James, you mind if I ask you a question? So in the experience you had in the UK, it sounded like you guys were kind of focused.
We don't talk about that.
Yeah, it sounded like you guys were focused on service delivery assurance and escalated incidents. And
we weren't. So we were a SaaS company, and we were focused. Our churn was too high because we had a product that wasn't
right.
Full of bugs. It was too hard to implement. We left it self-service and expected people to set themselves up, so they didn't do it well, and then they didn't get value. So they weren't getting enough value from the product, and the solution was customer success. Now, that is the right solution, but what I should have said is, I'll spend 10% of my time on churn, but unless I spend the majority of my time focused on fixing the onboarding process and providing voice of the customer feedback to the product team to accelerate closing the gaps in the product, right, then I'm always going to be on the back foot.
Right.
If all I do is run around with a fire extinguisher putting out fires and never focus on fire safety, like, I'm going to be busy the rest of my life, but I'll burn out, no pun intended. But I mean, that's literally what happens. People burn out in those roles because it's incredibly demotivating to always be dealing with issues and never feel like you're getting to the root cause of why those are happening.
Right. Yeah.
So think about, whether sales and you're comfortable having commercial type conversations with customers, and ask that question. If it's not evident in the job description, it's definitely a question to ask early in the process. Also, the technical complexity of the product is also something to pay attention to. And that's not just it's the complexity of the product, but also the responsibility of the CS role in that company. So you might have a very complex product, but customer success isn't expected to be an expert. They have success engineers, for example, or they have professional service consultants that can come in and provide that layer of expertise on the product. Your job in customer success is just to understand high-level business objectives and how the product fits into that, rather than actually engineer the detail. In other companies, though, you are both. You're performing both roles, and you need to be able to not just describe to them why they should be using a feature and how it's going to help them achieve a goal, but also like literally get in there and help them set it up and configure it. So some customer success managers are super comfortable with, they're very technical, and others are less so. So, it's important to understand what is the expectation of the role. Am I going to be the one going in and troubleshooting or helping set things up? Or do you have other people in the organization that are dedicated to that? Anyone got anything to add on that one? That makes sense? You agree? Yeah. Any other sort of, those were the three kind of first that came to mind for me for the kind of, as you're thinking about applying things to think about around the job role, those kind of three dimensions. Anything else?
Well, James, one other thought I have, I think an important question to ask is, how is the role compensated? Do you carry quota and commission, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you do, then you probably will lean more toward the renewal aspect and expansion aspect versus if you're not on quota and commission, you may be more aligned with net promoter scores and reducing churn and customer sat. So I think the important question, as an interviewer, if you're interviewing for a job, how is this position compensated? Are you expected to have a renewal quota? Do you have a target for growth? Or do you, are you your key performance indicator, net promoter scores, adoption rates, those kinds of things? That would probably guide you into the kind of role that the customer success position is geared towards. And hopefully it would say something like that in the job description, right? That you're a customer success manager and you're responsible for adoption rate, and you want to make sure that your customers are happy and you want to grow, land and expand. Yeah. I mean, those kinds of things will give you a clue as to where your strengths need to be for that particular position.
Yeah. I would just caution, this is Jerome, by the way, I would just caution, I've interviewed thousands of people for CSM role, and I've hired probably 200 in the last 3 years. If someone comes to me and asks me how they get paid, they don't go far. So I caution people that go into that question, which is a very valid line of question, a little bit differently around what are the key measurement goals for success for that role versus how I get paid. Because you come at me in my first interview and ask me how I get paid, you're not getting to round two.
Yeah, that's good. That's good feedback, Jerome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, unfortunately, we're in a very nascent industry that is there's still a lot of learning going on, even at the leadership level. So sometimes, I've definitely heard experiences where as you start to ask these questions, you start to feel uneasy. You're like, actually, it sounds like this company doesn't really do customer success in the way that I've read and I've researched. So it's a good way just to ask those questions, not in a way that kind of puts people on the spot, but just kind of asking open questions about how they think about success and how they, what their priorities are for their customer success team.
I like the way Jerome said it, right? What are
how the roles and responsibilities divided. Just open questions that will help you further in the interview process, but also just the responses and the way they responded can tell you a lot about the company.
Yeah, I mean, along that line, I would suggest like the very valid questions to ask that will open up the conversation to understand the role really deeply and really what is going to drive that decision from a hiring standpoint. Ask around the KPIs and the goals that or drive that. I think the other line of question that someone fails to really penetrate or ask or really probe into it is, what's my role going to be like in the first 90 days? And what do you expect from me in the first 90 days? Because ultimately that first 90 days is going to get you to what that end goal is going to be, and sort of the ramp that an employer is going to have to get you through that first 90 days will help you understand how they're going to measure success. Yeah. So those are really the two tangents. If you're trying to understand the nature of that role and what's going to make it tick, there's the two sort of avenues I would explore as an interviewee to really understand what I'm walking into.
Yeah, I would generally ask too, how did the organization come to create the customer success role? And where does it report in the organization? Because you can learn something from that, and then you can also ask them, where should it exist in an organization? And you might learn more in terms of kind of the push-pull, in terms of what they want to do with the customer success versus what they're potentially doing and or constrained by the organization. And that can kind of give you insight as well.
It's a good one, James. Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Okay. I'm just conscious of time, so I want to make sure we move on to, we can continue this conversation, obviously, in the Slack community. Onto the kind of resume, LinkedIn profile piece. Jerome, I'm going to be keen to hear your feedback on here. I'm sure you've got a very efficient process given the volume of
I'll tell you, and I'll give you a couple of hints, right? And I think if you're looking for your first job as a CSM, I mean, I'm hiring one right now, so I can give you some stats. The first week that job was posted, I received 450 resumes, right? In the first week alone, here in Atlanta, local job, not even open up to outside markets. And so, I'm also hiring a customer operations analyst. And that one, I received probably 250 resumes within the first week. And so just to get the resume, and so for most companies, so I'm going to put some caveat because I worked at a very small startup, and then I worked, I'm now with a much larger organization. Either places I've dealt with recruiters, whether it's an internal recruiter, an external recruiter, you have to get through that first part, even to get to me, right? So I'm not looking at 450 resumes. I got, out of 450 resumes, I got 15. I only looked at 15, right? So in the first week. And whether or not those 15s made the cut is what we determine whether or not we're going to get to the next sort of tranche of resumes. So the resume piece is pretty important. Now I'll tell you a couple of things. We added people to that 15 because one, they pinged me on LinkedIn, right? Or they got recommendations from other folks that knew me to say, hey, you should include them. And so if you don't do those things to try to promote your resume past the recruiter, you're not going to get through unless you have this amazing portfolio. And if you're making your first entry into CSM, that's a hard step. So you have to leverage a network to get to, I'm bluntly, to get to me. You have to leverage your network. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. You're just not going to get there. Because if you were in customer support and you're trying to make the move to CSM, right? That's not a tough leap from a career perspective, but from a resume perspective, if your resume doesn't have all those keywords and that recruiter that's spending maybe 15 seconds looking at your resume is going to get past that. So that's the first recommendation. Leverage network and referrals to the hiring manager to get a bump through, or even the recruiter if you have someone, but you have to get through that aspect of it. The second part is I don't look at a resume until I've looked at a LinkedIn profile. So if your LinkedIn profile doesn't match your resume, or if you don't have a picture and you don't have details about your role and your accomplishment and your achievements, you don't get to the resume. I don't even get to your resume. So your LinkedIn profile better be sort of not a carbon copy, but a really good descriptive profile of what you look like. I'll tell you, in the past, I've had many experiences with a resume that doesn't match what's on LinkedIn. And then I question sort of the integrity of what I'm looking at and that person. So because there are so many resumes out there and so many things, I actually think that people tend to be more truthful about their experiences on LinkedIn because they have so many eyeballs on it than a piece of paper that I can't validate. And so my initial cut will be what's on LinkedIn. And so if you don't have a picture and if you just have a job title and no description, I feel like you're not invested in your job search, and it's going to be a hard sell to get past the next level. So those would be sort of the first two recommendations I have if you're kind of getting into customer success roles, at least from the machine of recruiting and hiring. It's a pretty significant, there's a significant volume that you have to sort of filter through.
Yeah. Great advice. Great advice. And I think you touched on keywords, and this is a tricky one, right? Because there's a lot of people now rebranding their resume with customer success on previous roles that weren't called customer success because they know it's kind of, what recruiters are looking for, and they think it's going to get them through the door. I don't know about you, Jerome. I feel pretty good at sniffing that out. Like, you can tell pretty quickly, and then that annoys me. So then I don't want to speak to that person. So what I'd recommend is that you reframe your past experiences in a way that resonates with those core skills and traits that I would be looking for when I'm looking for a customer success manager. And so rather than just, change the title of your role, let's think about the things that you did in that role, which maybe weren't at the time, if you were applying for that role again, maybe wouldn't be the most important things you'd highlight. But since you're now applying for a customer success role, what are the aspects of your previous responsibilities that you can really bubble up to the surface and think about the keywords and things you use in there, right? Because just small things like, I was speaking to somebody who did she did some training for new people that came on board. And I said, well, so you did a form of onboarding, right? Let's get that word onboarding in there. It's not like I'm not lying. It's not like that wasn't deceptive. That was just using a word that does resonate in this industry to better describe a skill you have, which was actually relevant to the role of customer success. So it can be some quite, subtle things like that, but also I think you start with what I care about as an employer is not what your previous job title was. It's have you got the skills? Have you demonstrated the skills to?
I actually have a very different perspective than you, James. I don't even actually care about the skills all that much.
Well, okay. You unpack that, and then I'll unpack it.
Well, so I'm looking for a couple of things, but so I think primarily what I'm looking for is cultural fit with the right persona that's going to fit the culture of the company and the interaction that I need to have with my customer. So some of the skills that are needed with the roles that I've hired for in the past, I can take someone who's in a completely different, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples, right? I hired someone who worked at Hertz that was at the counter for someone you're renting a car at the airport. You go to a counter and you're going to rent a car, right? She's today a director of a customer success for a startup. I hired her as a customer success manager. And in 5 years, she became a director because she just had the right personality and the right sort of aptitude and attitude towards the role. But you look at someone who was sitting at a Hertz counter for 2 years, you may not think of that as a relevant role for a SaaS business software, but it translated really, really well. And so that the skill set can be transferred from many different industries and verticals, and so you don't have to be in the software business to be able to be a good customer success person in the software business, right? Now I've also hired sales reps that were wanting to move more to the sort of farming side, and I've had a really mixed ratio on that in terms of success, and so that's why aptitude and personality becomes really important. You may be this killer sales rep and you've got this A-type personality, and it's a real tough struggle to go into a customer success role, but you might have been a sales rep that was more of a hunter-gatherer sort of so not hunter-gatherer, but farmer, and really struggle in sort of that A-type personality of going out there and killing, but then you become a really good customer success role, right? And so someone who struggled to meet their numbers as a sales rep, I'm not gonna overlook at that, because if that culture and that role doesn't meet that personality, might be a really good fit for me here on what I'm trying to do with my role. And like there's so many different aspects behind what the background is, but that's why I'm looking at sort of the person's skills, and my interview base is pretty. The list of questions I go through in an interview would probably shock you, because I'm just trying to get to your person and how you react to certain situations, and not walk me through this example, and this example. That's why I said, John, that's why, James, I said I'm a little bit different from that, because.
Well, yeah. I think we're on the same page, actually, and I 100% agree with everything you said. My CS team, like, I've got 3 ex-Apple retail folks, on the team, who are awesome performers, and they've just, they've got maybe. So I think of skills as kind of like the traits, the way that they kind of under the core traits. It's not necessarily skills where like I train them on Excel. It's more of an approach. So I think of when I think of like Apple retail, for example, they just know how to deal with customers. They know how to handle conflicts. They know how to ask good questions to understand what somebody really is looking for. And so absolutely transferable. In fact, most people getting customer success roles today have not done customer success before. That's just a fact. There's more roles being created than there are people looking for roles who have done it before. So, if you are looking and this is your first time, don't be discouraged by that. But for the volume of people looking is high, so you do need to take on board some of the great advice that Jerome gave around kind of how to stand out and get to at least get under consideration for a role.
I hired a beautician as a customer success once, and she did amazing. Think about that, right?
Yeah.
She was a beautician.
Well, that's what I love about this, right? This is an opportunity for people to transfer into, and not that customer success is only in the tech industry now, it mostly is, although saw BMW announced you can now subscribe to heated seats, and they've got a subscription service now for BMW. All the cars come fitted with all the gadgets, but you subscribe, a bit like a Tesla model where you can subscribe to different options. So customer success will go beyond technology and pure software companies, but it's just such a great way for people to get into software and technology who previously didn't really have a clear path. So I love that about it. I think, I've met ex-Disney I've met wedding planners and Disney tour guides and all sorts, who are now being really successful as CSMs. So that's exciting to me. Any other thoughts on LinkedIn, particularly? I think LinkedIn.
So I have just a couple tactical things that I think are really helpful. First, just to second what Jerome said about reaching out. I think that's something I mentioned at the last in-person meetup as well, is that you're more than likely, statistically, your resume is going to get lost in the void of, recruiting platforms, LinkedIn, whatever. If most roles, you're probably getting a few hundred applicants in the first week. I saw a job was posted over the weekend, holiday weekend, for a SaaS company here in Atlanta. It already has over 200 applicants, and it's only Wednesday. So it happens very quickly, and you're competing with a lot of just paper. And so I'm consistently shocked at how few people actually reach out to hiring managers or the company or try to find the hiring manager. But I think that just sends your chances through the roof. So that should be something that you do. It seems like a no-brainer, but it is. I think it really does increase your chances a lot. And maybe you're not the right fit, and maybe you'll get an immediate response, and that still beats waiting 3 weeks to hear something through a automated platform or something. So I think it's a win-win no matter what. Either you get a better shot, you get moved to the next round just for reaching out, or you find out immediately that what they're looking for is not lined up with what you have to offer. So that's first. Second, I really like having a third piece to my resume in LinkedIn. It's more just a background piece, and that's an Excel doc. For each role I have different basically different key either achievements or functions that I performed, whatever it might be. I have them all listed in an Excel doc. And then of course, you should be tailoring your resume to the job that you're applying for. So LinkedIn, generally try to keep something that's like a general overview of what you've done. Definitely keep some accomplishments in there as well, but it should be consistent with what's in your resume, but maybe your resume highlights a few key things that are more suited to what the role is looking for. So if it is something where the role is looking for, you're responsible for renewals or cross-sell, upsell, maybe you do want to include something on there about some of your more sales-focused achievements, or maybe it's a role that's focused on implementation, and you want to talk a little bit more about some of your integration or implementation wins. So I think you can tailor your resume to be a little bit more specific to the role itself. Maybe you can get a little bit deeper in some of those wins, and then your LinkedIn is like a slightly broader big picture as to what you do.
Well, thanks, Clark.
Hey, James, this is Rod. So I had a team of like 50 customer success managers for a while, and one of the best resources that I had were referrals. So you guys talked about, do you know the hiring manager? Do you know somebody in the company? One of the things I did was go to my existing customer success managers and ask them, who do you know in this particular geography that has the skill sets we need? So, the importance of the network, I think, is very important in terms of, you may not know the hiring manager, but if you know somebody in the company that can give you a referral. I know it worked for me. I would, if I got a referral from an existing employee, I would look at that, probably put it on top, and instead of the 200, I think somebody said 200. I used to get those too. I would look for referrals or look for somebody that had reached out and gone a little bit above and beyond.
Right. Yeah. We're all busy. Make life easy for the hiring manager.
Right.
Just hand him yourself on a plate and make it, make it really easy. Yeah, it's demoralizing. I know when you're in the hunt and you feel like just never breaking through that first layer, and that can be exhausting. I would suggest if that is happening, then think about who you can reach out to kind of get a different perspective on what you're doing. It would be horrible if you're applying to the right jobs, for example, but there's something about your resume that's just turning people off every time, or your LinkedIn profile, you've got some, goofy photo of you on a beach, and that can just be enough. You're just like, it can just be enough, like in a competitive landscape, for somebody to think, yeah, that's not the imagery you want to project. Why have they chosen that? That's an interesting decision. What does that tell me about that person, right? So just getting a second set of eyes on your resume, on your LinkedIn profile. Make sure that there's nothing kind of there that's holding you back. And then it's a question, I think, of doing some of these extra things that have been mentioned today. Just to and don't, when you send a LinkedIn message, think about what you're writing, and don't just copy and paste something generic. That does no good, right? So look for that mutual connection you've got. Maybe look for that, piece of experience you have that you think that it would just be enough to pique that person's interest, that hiring manager's interest. It's like, this is actually, by the way, a core skill of customer success, right? Is being relevant in your communications, not taking a cookie cutter kind of one size fits all approach. So you're really just practicing, like, if you reach out to me like that for a job, then I'll be thinking, well, how are you going to reach out to my customers when you're in the role? So demonstrate those behaviors that you know that are required for the role. Okay, 7 minutes left. Gosh, it was ambitious to think we would solve job hunting in an hour, but we got some of the way there. Let's just talk about the interview piece. Let's say you've done your LinkedIn shuffle. You've got yourself your resume on the table. You've got maybe a phone screen. Typically, is the first thing, right? You'll have a phone screen, typically with the internal or external recruiter. If that goes well, then you may have another phone screen with the hiring manager. If that goes well, then you're probably going to do some sort of in-person or more, in-depth exercise. There's lots to talk about in all of that stuff. One thing that I thought might be useful just to talk about what those exercises sometimes look like. But if there's any other points that anybody wants to make on any of those on that kind of interview process or pipeline piece, then now's the time. What do you think? What those of you who maybe have been through the flow recently, what are the type of things you've been asked to do during an interview or in between interviews?
So I can speak a little bit on what we do at ER Express, and then also I'm always kind of passively seeing what's out there. So I've done some interviews in the past couple months and had the opportunity to see what those look like. So we do a pretty standard phone screen with a recruiter or someone internal if we have the bandwidth. And then that likely goes to another phone screen with the hiring manager. And then we bring them in for a longer, like 3-hour interview. Now that looks a little bit different, but before all of this on site, do a behavioral interview, and then we'd also do a series of cases. So we do, for our recent product specialist role, we created a bunch of fake tickets in a Zendesk sandbox environment. They're all relevant. They're real scenarios that we encounter quite a bit, and we have them sit down. We kind of walk through ranking them and working through those tickets together. We do a similar test with Excel just to see data analytics. We're not looking for all the right answers. Rather, we want to see how they think through these problems and these problem sets. So we're trying to tease at what their thought process is and see just how they think about complex situations, how they get information, things like that. So that's what we do. I've seen some similar case-based tests with data sets, putting together presentations on what a customer could improve, maybe take a look at their website, see how you could better use this tool. So things like that where you're having to kind of take a look at something that might be unfamiliar to you and draw conclusions based on maybe what little you might know about the product or the company, and then produce some level of product or report that displays your, I guess, intuition about. Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah, I think customers, I firmly believe customers have most of the answers to the questions we're trying to answer within a company. So I think that kind of the ability to ask good questions, to actively listen, to get to the root cause of why somebody's asking you. Like, customers often ask for something, but understanding the why they're asking is going to enable you to provide better solutions. And so those are all things that I think they're called kind of foundational skills, regardless of the exact CS model you operate. and you know, regardless of whether it's a specific exercise or not, I think most leaders are always looking at just kind of how you're, just the questions you ask them, or how you approach an exercise, or how you, you know, when you're answering an email, do you answer the question that was posed, or do you dig that extra layer deeper to make sure you're really understanding the problem they're having? You can get at that from in different forms, but I think those are kind of core themes that I look to be demonstrated at various points in the interview process.
I think the only advice I'm going to say, and I have to drop off in a minute, but especially in the early stages, right? Because once you get into the later stage, you know, I think you'll get, you know, the process will vary. Like Clark gave a pretty good example of once you get deeper in the process, it goes in all sorts of different directions because each company will have a very different set of skills or tests or whatever. But the initial parts are very similar anybody you interview with for the most part, which is get through the recruiter, and then you got to have that first phone screen. And so for the recruiter that I've worked with in the past, they're checklist oriented. So they're going to go through and they're checking for a couple of things, but they're really checking also for sort of someone who's going to fit culture and all that kind of stuff. So they've got some guidelines they're working through, and they're going to filter within that and that kind of present. I'll talk about that first screen that I have. I have a 30-minute screen with my calls, or my first call is a 30-minute screen, and I'll tell you what I look for. And so I look for conversation, right? If I'm going through a 30-minute conversation and I'm the one who's asking every single question and I'm just getting answers, that's a really tough screen. I'm looking for someone who's going to engage me into a conversation. And by the time I finish that 30-minute conversation, I felt, hey, you know what? We just talked for 30 minutes. And I'll open up the conversation saying, hey, we've got 30 minutes. You know, 15 minutes are for me to try to get to know you a little bit better. 15 minutes are for you because I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. Let's chat, right? And if that person that I'm talking to doesn't take initiative in that conversation to take that conversation, I struggle to say how they're going to have a conversation with my customer and take control or take initiatives within that conversation with my customer. So if someone is just responding to my questions, and after 25 minutes, if I'm the only one who's asked questions or I'm driving that conversation all the way through, it's tough to get through that gate. So you gotta, and so that means you gotta do homework. You gotta know who you're talking to. You gotta take it to a personal level with them. You gotta understand a little bit part of the business. You gotta ask questions around some of the things we talked about earlier, all of those things, but you gotta take control. You gotta take initiative in that conversation, right? And if you don't, that to me, that's a giant opportunity miss or fail, because you may have a really solid resume and background, but if you don't drive that conversation, you know, I feel like it doesn't extrapolate well to the next steps. So that's my advice.
And I would just add on to that, driving conversation does not mean you talk for 30 minutes. That's also bad, right?
100%. Yes.
Yeah. Ask questions, wait, pause, don't just talk.
With that, I got to jump on a customer call. It's very nice.
We are at our time as well. So thanks, Jerome. Thanks everybody for being here. As a reminder, we will continue this conversation over in the Slack community. The link is posted in the chat box in case you missed it earlier in the presentation. So it's a bit.ly link, ATLCS-community. I'll just post it again so that it's at the bottom. And then, yeah, hopefully see you in there. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. If anyone has any specific questions they want to reach out directly, please do it via the Slack community.